Today we are going to make a low FODMAP vegetable broth and chicken stock. Although the words stock and broth are often used interchangeably, a stock uses bones and a broth uses more meat or vegetables instead of bones. Making your own broth or stock with the low FODMAP diet is helpful because most broths are going to contain onion and garlic, which you cannot have during the elimination phase. Be prepared though to want to keep making it yourself once you realize how cheap, easy, and flavorful it is. The first thing I'm doing for both the chicken stock and vegetable broth is adding some garlic olive oil to both pots and turning the heat on medium. For today's stock, I'm using a leftover chicken carcass and thigh bones from my freezer. I keep a bag in the freezer that I toss leftover bones in just for making stock. Don't worry about taking off any extra meat from the bones, it just adds flavor. I pulled these out of the freezer last night so they would thaw out. I have less than 2 pounds of these bones, so I'm also going to use some fresh chicken thigh meat that I have on hand. Since the thigh meat is raw, I'm going to sear it in the pan a little first to bring out some more of the flavor. Some people do this by roasting in the oven, but I like doing it in the same pot to make less dirty dishes. The chicken bones from the freezer have already been cooked, so I'm going to add them after the thigh meat is done searing. Now on to the vegetables. This is where your low FODMAP broth or stock is going to be a little different than what most recipes will have. Instead of adding garlic, onion, or whatever vegetables you like, we have to consider the FODMAPs and what we add. I use the food guide on the Monash University FODMAP diet app to determine what foods are safe and which ones to avoid. This app isn't free, but it is a one-time purchase, and I personally think that it's definitely worth the small cost. The low FODMAP diet was developed by Monash University, and they test all of their foods on the app, so it's going to be the most accurate information. This video is in no way sponsored by them. I just personally trust the accuracy of their app since they developed this diet compared to other free apps I've tried where I don't know their source. The Monash University app uses a traffic light system to indicate if it is low, moderate, or high FODMAP. This is what I use when selecting the vegetables to use in my broth and stock. The vegetables I'm using today all have the green light on the app, which means they are low FODMAP. Keep in mind that sometimes the serving size is the determining factor for the FODMAP content. You can also freeze your vegetable scraps to throw in just like you can with the bones. I don't have any at the moment, so I'm going to be using all fresh veggies today. I'm going to cut everything for the vegetable broth into small to medium pieces. The broth is only going to cook for about an hour or so, and I want more surface area to release the most flavor in that short time. For the stock, however, I want to keep everything larger. If I cut any of these vegetables, it will only be in halves or fourths because this is going to cook much longer than the broth. First, I'm going to add the green top of a leek. The bulb is high in FODMAPs, but the leaves are not. Since we cannot use onions, this is a way to get some of an onion taste. Next, I have oyster mushrooms. If you add mushrooms, be careful what kind you are using because some types like button mushrooms are not low FODMAP in any serving size. I'm adding these whole to the stock, but roughly chopping them for the broth. I have 1 tomato for each, and I'm cutting out the gooey insides with the seeds. I'm cutting a couple carrots into large pieces for the stock, and about 6 carrots cut into smaller pieces for the broth. Next, I have a red bell pepper, and I'm going to add 1/4 of it into each pot, along with part of a green chili. I'm going to let these cook in the olive oil and brown them up a bit before I add anything else. I have tried roasting them in the oven first, but find it easier and just as flavorful to let them cook in the garlic oil on the stove. Now that these have gotten some color on them, I'm going to add everything else that I didn't want to brown. I have 1 cucumber for each pot and some ginger that I've already peeled that was in the freezer. Freezing ginger will make it a little mushier when it thaws, but for something like this, that is fine and it ensures you always have some on hand. Green onions are like leeks and the green tops are low FODMAP, but the bulb is not. I'm going to leave the other fresh herbs whole, which are parsley, purple basil, rosemary, and thyme. Now it's time to add water. The water should completely submerge everything in the pot. Some of the water will evaporate, so make sure everything is covered by at least 1 inch. I have a habit of being really bad at estimating what will fit, so I ended up adding too many vegetables and not having enough room for an extra inch of water. If you do the same thing though, no worries. For me, when the water evaporated, the vegetables also shrunk down, so everything still ended up staying covered, but you can always add water while it's cooking if things aren't covered anymore. I almost forgot the black peppercorns, bay leaf, and a little bit of salt. You can add these before the water if you do remember. I don't use very much salt because I'm going to use the broth or stock as ingredients in other recipes, and I want to be able to salt them later according to what I'm using them for. You can always add salt later, but you can't take it away. We want to bring both of these to a boil and then turn them down a bit. Most people don't want the stock to keep boiling because they want to skim the scum off the top, and if it's boiling, it will stir everything around and they can't skim the top as easily. I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other about this. Just know if you don't skim it, then you will probably have a cloudier stock than if you did. The vegetable broth shouldn't have scum though, since there is no meat, so it should be fine to keep boiling, or you can turn it down to a simmer. I'm going to leave both of these at a high simmer and leave them uncovered so they can reduce down. The vegetable broth only needs about an hour. The chicken stock, however, needs some more time for the bones and connective tissues in the chicken to release collagen. This is what is going to make the stock have that gelatinous texture when it is chilled. It's been about an hour and my vegetable broth is done cooking, so I'm going to use a mesh spoon thing to remove the large pieces and then strain out the rest with a fine strainer. If you really want to strain everything out, you can put some cheesecloth in your strainer. After straining it, I like freezing this into cubes to make it easier to use in the future. I bought these silicone ice cube trays at a local grocery store, and I like them better than normal ice cube trays because this one freezes into large cube shapes that are about 2 tablespoons each. I'm going to pour this into the silicone trays, let it cool down, and then pop these into the freezer. It's finally been around 6 long hours, and my stock is finally finished. My preferred method of knowing when it's done is nothing fancy, I just use the taste test. Starting at around 4 hours, I tasted a spoonful every hour to taste if it was flavored enough for me. I was straining it the same way that I just did with the vegetable broth, by first removing the large pieces with the mesh spoon and then straining the rest with a fine strainer. I'll use most of this to make a chicken soup and then freeze the rest into cubes like I did with the vegetable broth. Experiment with your favorite low FODMAP vegetables and different types of meat and bones to find your favorite way to make broth or stock. And be prepared to never want to buy the store-bought stuff again. If you found this helpful, subscribe for some more low FODMAP recipes. Next time, I'm going to try making some Halloween-themed low FODMAP recipes so everyone can be festive without worrying about their gut. See you next time!